Hey, it's Doris with All the Books, and I'm here to talk about two great books from the Booker shortlist. I am extremely happy that I was drawn to these books, got them immediately, and read them immediately, and I would be delighted with either one winning the prize. I loved them both for different reasons. I think that they both are flawed, but the message and the way it's delivered is critical to the story, and I would say that they are flawed in a similar way to They're There, which I read last month and really enjoyed and thought was quite profound. And I'm wondering if it's a new trend in literature to not stick the landing in books. It's very effective. It leaves you thinking, and you keep coming back to the story and thinking about it and trying to figure it out. So yeah, I'm wondering if the flaws are deliberate here, or if maybe it's just a reflection of the times that we're living in, because we live in very flawed times and very uncertain times. But anyway, let's just talk about these books and see if we can come to terms with them, or if I can relay my thoughts in a cohesive manner here, because there are a lot of thoughts. The Overstory by Richard Powers. This is a book about our old hardwood forests, coniferous forests, all the forests, and the plight of these forests due to man's insatiable urge to further his economy. Yeah. And the plight of humanity because of that, because we need our trees, people. We need our trees. So this book preaches to the choir in a sense that people that are going to be drawn to it are people like me who already love trees and know how critical they are. This is somewhat inaccessible in that it is very very heavy on the biology of trees and the knowledge of different varieties of trees, and how that makes you appreciate the story more, to have that background understanding. It's also very much can be read as a slog fest in the nature of Barkwood. It reminded me of Barkwood a great deal in different ways, but that same jumping around of the narrative and never a true coming together resolution that made sense in the narrative. So yeah, I can see that it might not be reaching the people it needs to, but maybe it is, because maybe it's telling people that, like me, that already appreciate nature, that we need to do more. So there's that. So this book is originally, the first 150 pages are a series of short stories, completely unrelated except for thematically and structurally, but the first 150 pages were brilliant. I just loved them. They were so brilliant. The last short story just minutely brings the stories together, tells you what direction it's going to go in. So from there, he branches out into telling the stories of these different people he's introduced in the beginning and bringing some of their storylines together. It is in a very seemingly haphazard and choppy way. So that's, where he's starting to lose people. If you were roped in at the beginning, you might start to get lost because you have this expectation of this story coming together and really saying something. Maybe, you're left a little bit hanging there. But thematically, besides the trees, two of the things that I saw in this were beauty and tragedy. I think it's kind of neat that one of the storylines was from Macbeth, and you know, the moving trees that were hiding the army behind them, and that just is so profound to this story, so profound. But anyway, beauty and tragedy. There are so many beautiful scenes in this story. For example, the two people living up in the canopy of the hardwoods, the redwoods in California or Oregon for 10 months. Oh my gosh. That setting up in the canopy of the trees and reading about the little ponds and the little forest growing in the trees was just magical. I never dreamed it was so beautiful up there. Just really magical. And then there's another scene that's talked about where this couple lets their yard just go fallow and lets nature take its course, and you know, succession happens and the grass turns to seedlings, starts becoming a forest again. And you know, the anger of the neighbors that they would dare not mow their lawn is just funny, and I could get on my soapbox right now, but I won't. I'll stick to the story. But then how this couple who have not been able to have children of their own start looking at the trees and thinking about the child they never had and imagining her as the trees. It's just really, really like a fairy tale. Just beautiful once you realize what they're saying there. But then on the flip side, both those lives, you have the tragedy involved in them, and heart-wrenching tragedy, and I'll just leave it there. But yeah, beauty and tragedy in this novel. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about it, but let me just tell you, the quotes in here are stunning. And I will I'll tell you now, I just watched Helene Jeppesen this morning, her reading vlog for the month of September. I would highly suggest you go watch it, at least the second half. She's got a little clip about her thoughts on the Overstory, which were spot on. She did a great job of bringing you her thoughts in a cohesive manner, and I really, they were exactly what I was thinking, exactly. And she had a great quote that I have it written down here, but I want you to go watch what she says to see what she said about that quote. But there are so many quotes in this story that you're just going to be blown away by. One of them that I wrote down: as certain as weather coming from the west, the things people know for sure will change. There is no knowing for a fact. The only dependable things are humility and looking. And yeah, that just says so much to me. This book says so much to me. Now, by contrast or comparison, both of those things, Washington Black, to me, is just as literary, but while the flaw in this one that is maybe a little bit too literary, the flaw that I'm seeing people talk about with this one is that it's too fluffy. People are saying, oh, it's just an adventure nonfiction and not quite realistic, and that romance though, and I get all of that, I do, but I think this is highly accessible. You will love reading this. I just think so. I think that the story is great, and just you get immersed in it and just whoo, except for the romance, which does slow down, I will agree, but I'll get to that. But yeah, if you slow down, the story sweeps you along and you get caught up in it, and you can not stop to read what she's saying. if you slow down and read what she's saying, this book is so profound. So profound. She's just so light-handed with her thoughts that you can miss it if you're not paying attention. Whereas Richard Powers is my uncle. Richard Powers, he's quite heavy-handed in this book, I will say. There are some points in time where there are things he wants to say, and he just creates these random conversations in truck stops to deliver political statements or scientific facts, and it's quite heavy-handed. But Essie Adugan, she's so light-handed. It's brilliant. It's truly brilliant. I think I wrote down, yeah. I'll just read you one of her little quotes here. I looked at the dusty floor some moments. What is the truth of my life, Titch? I doubt even the man who lives it can say. I raised my face. You cannot know the true nature of anyone's suffering. And this is the other guy. This is his response. He says, no, but you can try your damnedest not to worsen it. Oh, this book. So let's talk about this book. It starts with the little boy, Washington Black, in Barbados. He's a slave, and his master is kind of, you know, typical Gone with the Wind style. He's not so bad. But then he dies and his son takes over, who is so bad and horrific. But there's another brother, and this brother takes Washington as his assistant and escapes with him in the hot air balloon, which is not magical realism. It's a real thing. I looked it up, and first hot air balloons were in France in the late 1700s, just prior to the setting of this novel. So not magical fiction there. This is the real deal. But you have this little boy and the white slave master's brother who helps him escape as his assistant and teaches him so much. So you've got this setup for the white savior, which is an often talked about theme in literary fiction with the slave narrative. And I was just really caught up in where that storyline was going to go, bearing in mind that Essie Adugan is a Black author from Canada living in England, and I thought she would handle it differently, and I was not disappointed. It was just brilliant to read this narrative from her perspective as a woman of color. She did a great job, and I thought it was very thought-provoking. So anyway, like in the Overstory, where you have the contrast between beauty and tragedy, in this story you have contrasts, but they're between characters. So the brothers, you have the contrast between this evil character and this seemingly good character, and how that story is going to come about. And it is resolved in the end with that quote that I just read to you, and it is profound. Just the idea of this tragedy that you create in your youth and how it can affect two people so differently, and how, you know, their paths can diverge and how that affects people. Oh, very deep. This is a deep book. It's not just an adventure novel with a romance. And then speaking of the romance, you know, I've been gearing up for Victober, and I've been thinking about Victorian literature a lot over this past year, and I really think it's neat that Victorian literature takes the time to get to know the characters. You know, they weren't consumed with their iPhones and their Netflix and, you know, all the other entertainments that are out there. They didn't have that much. They had, like, you know, charades and serial novels, and they would read these chapters out loud, you know, once a month, however often they were delivered. Probably read them multiple times with each other and, you know, discuss them. And we have just, I think, come to a time where a novel has to be perfect in 300 pages. And I think that is probably the problem with this romance, is that it slows down the pacing of the book tremendously and seemingly is very superficial. It's very superficial to the storyline, and you know, if you read the storyline on a superficial level, you're like, eh. But it's critical to the story. That time is critical because the romance involves Washington Black, who is an escaped slave from Barbados, and a girl who is of mixed heritage. Her father is a white guy from England, fairly well off, a scientist, and her mother was a black woman from another island or in Africa. I can't remember the location, but the dad had met her, and she passed away, and he ended up deciding that his daughter would have a better life with him. And she is fairly white, light-skinned, and passes as white. So the father, when he first meets Washington Black and realizes that there's a romantic interest between him and his daughter, he's not a fan. He's not a fan because he realizes that it could be a problem for his child, which is ironic, I know. But you see the natural evolution of his thoughts, the dad's thoughts about the relationship and how he comes to terms with it. And that process and his end result is critical to the storyline, because going back to the white savior narrative, the contrast between Titch, who is the man that helped Washington Black escape, and this father, Mr. Goss, the contrast between them and what Essie says about their perspectives and their motivation with Washington Black and their relationship with him is just profound. If you slow down and read, the 2 chapters are, you know, toward the second half and back to back, and if you slow down and pay attention to what she's saying there, wow. Just wow. And the other thing that I really appreciated was the international scope of this novel. Most of the, you know, growing up in North America and in the U.S., most of the slave narratives that I read are, you know, based in the South, where it was such a huge, huge part of our culture that reverberates to this day. So this one, being written by a Canadian author living in England, it starts out in Barbados, it travels through Virginia, up the coastline to Canada, even farther to Antarctica, and then over to England. And just the way Washington Black was able to live his life outside of the slavery heavy South was just really interesting for me to read, and I loved it. And I love the storyline with the sea creatures. The Canadian edition has a big octopus on the front, and that really plays into the story just as much as the hot air balloon. I kind of would love to collect all 3 covers, because the US cover is really simplistic with just black text on a white cover and 2 little characters up here. But when you read the story, you realize that it's a wanted poster for when Washington Black escapes, and the 2 little people at the top are, you know, like in Antarctica in the snow. So I kind of would love to have all 3, to be quite honest. But I think that's all I have to say, except for the endings. So again, just like they're there. I am still left processing these endings. Like, this one, I really pretty much, for the most part, get the resolution with Washington Black and Titch, the guy that sort of rescued him initially. But the last paragraph, if you've read the book and you have thoughts on that last paragraph, I'd be curious to hear them, because I'm still processing what I think about it. And then this one as well, like I said, this one I think is deliberately kind of unresolved because the issue is unresolved. But I'm trying to, I think he's trying to be really profound with those last few words that I think the trees are uttering, but I'm not sure I get it. I'm thinking about it. So yeah, if you have thoughts on the last paragraph of either of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm still thinking about it. But anyway, I hope I didn't ramble too much and that I had a few cohesive thoughts there, but really, these books are deep. There's a lot of thoughts to be had from them, and yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So thanks so much for watching, and I will be back soon.